C. Communism. From Old French, common, common, and ism, practice, quality, or system. Thus, common quality, or the practice of common quality. Communist philosophy believes that a communal life gives true freedom from limitations and contentment in one's works, by allowing people to do what they want for how long they want to. Cooperating with one's fellow man in this way eliminates the desire to exploit one's fellow man. Thus, in its ideal form, it is a peaceful system of absolute equality and subsequently practically a fantasy. Communism is an archetypal concept, which, contrary to popular belief, has never been implemented. All governments, to date, claiming to be communist, are not but corrupt attempts at socialism, masquerading dictatorships, bringing misconception and negativity to both socialism and communism. Communism is the pinnacle of socialism. It is an ideal state of human cooperation which has never yet been achieved, save by some small sects such as monasteries, and most likely will remain a fantasy. The exact reason communism cannot be implemented is because of the faults of man. Every man, save not one, must be enlightened, so that the entire society is pious and selfless in order to achieve such a degree of equality and cooperation. This epic challenge is why communism remains a fantasy. All supposed communistic systems to date have kept a hierarchy of elite ruling and dictating to the workers, a direct contradiction of the practice of communism, as they have not established communal ownership of property and absolute equality. These dictatorships and repressive governments that falsely claim to practice communism defame its name. For example, China's supposed communist system has a ruling elite suppressing all workers and dealing them out to the Western capitalists for slave wages. The working poor are far from in control as directly defined by communism. Where in any of these supposed socialist and communistic governments and economies has the working class ever ruled? Never. It is only by groups of despots separate from the people who claim to represent the working class while they direct and control them for their own ends. No different from any other controlling system. No matter what one labels it, it is simply tyranny. Socialism can only truly exist under a direct democracy, otherwise it is perverted, and thus cannot evolve into communism. Thus far, the definitions of the above governments and economies were relatively simple, summed up in a few sentences. This is how any word should be. When a word cannot be described in such a simple manner, the word has become ambiguous and used for too many purposes, sometimes conflicting. It is at this time when the word needs either redefined or replaced by a newer, clearer defined term. Look up 50 different definitions for communism and you will find 50 different answers. The word means so many things now because so many fools have titled governments as communistic when they were nothing above tyranny. It has also become a word applied to any form of evil or suspect political practice. Therefore, much is written below on communist definitions because of the term's dire need for disambiguation. The vast meanings of the word shall be shown to clearly distinguish from the definition to be used in this document so as to avoid being demonized when describing the few gems this system has to offer to nobility. 1. The political, social, and economic system of certain countries in which the state, governed by a single party without formal opposition, owns all property, controls the production and distributions of goods and services, and to a great extent controls the social and cultural life of the people. Vincent Massey High School. A note on this definition. The governed by a single party without formal opposition part has little to do with communistic economy and a lot to do with tyrannical government. Also, quote, and to a great extent controls the social and cultural life of the people, unquote, would be under tyranny also, as communism by definition has no ruling class. It also fails to define, quote, the state, unquote, which is supposed to be the people and not a separate tyrannical entity. Number 2. A term that can refer to one of several things, a social and economic system, an ideology which supports that system, or a political movement that wishes to implement that system. B. Communism is an ideology that seeks to establish a classless, stateless, social organization based on common ownership of the means of production. Wikipedia. A note on this definition. The latter, the political movement, is what has demonized the system. Too many tyrants have falsely claimed to have implemented the system, utterly defaming it. Number 3. An economic theory which stresses that the control of the means of producing economic goods in a society should reside in the hands of those who invest their labor for production. In its ideal form, social classes cease to exist, and there is no coercive governmental structures, and everyone lives in abundance without supervision from a ruling class. The Illinois State University History Department. A note on this definition. According to this definition, one can see that communism has never yet been implemented. Number 4. An economic system in which capital is owned by private government contrasts with capitalism. Deardorff's Glossary of International Economics. A note on this definition. This definition does not describe communism but tyranny. Capital is owned equally by the people in communism, and there is no private ownership. Capitalism is where capital is owned by private forces, some larger than governments. Number 5. A system of government in which the state plans and controls the economy and a single, often authoritarian party holds power, claiming to make progress towards a higher social order in which all goods are equally shared by the people. WGBH Educational Foundation. A note on this definition. The authoritarian party is a misleading concept because once a civilization is in unity, any deviation from that is not unity. Thus, all in agreement would consequently be all of the same belief, therefore, a party. Again, the state is not defined, leaving much space for the entity separate from the people to be implied, which again is tyranny. Also, communism is more an economic system than a governmental system. Its cooperative economic methods actually negate government in its ideal form. Number 6. A political theory derived from Marxism, advocating a society in which all property is publicly owned and each person is paid and works according to his or her needs and abilities. The University of Sydney, Cuban Missile Crisis Glossary. A note on this definition. Marxism is but one branch of communist philosophy. Thus, this definition defines only Marxist communism, not communism itself. All these definitions were thus shown not only to show the various definitions claiming to define a concept while either erroneously defining it, only partially defining it, or defining another word in its place, thus propagating misunderstanding amongst the masses. Therefore, for the remainder of the document, only the definition below will be used. An economic system where all property and the means of production and distribution are equally owned and governed by each citizen of the Union. Myths have become associated with communism because of the tyrants who used its label to hide their tyranny, one of them being the belief in no God. This is found in some schools of thought derived from communism, but is not an ideal communistic belief. Some of the earliest communistic societies were monks, sharing between each other, thus the belief in God was definitely present. Communism is an economic system. To describe thoughts of divinity in the same sentence is to deviate from the scope of the core definition. When doing so, one is discussing communism as applied to God, instead of defining communism itself. The individualist believes that only ignorant, profane, and tyrannical systems would outlaw or teach no God in any government or economic system. Unfortunately, the most popular system of communism is Marxist communism, which indirectly teaches violence. Violence need not be implemented to usurp corporate fascism or any other oppressor. The Marxist revolutionary solution can easily be used by evil in the guise of good to rally a powerful revolutionary force, and when finished with them, enslave them. The only way this or any other type of enslavement can be avoided, and an oppressor successfully removed and a newly implemented system maintained, is by thorough education of the masses to the principles which initiate, uphold, and maintain both systems, as well as the reasoning for doing so, else the system quickly dissolves to tyranny. Individualism sees communism as an extremist practice, far from practical application to the masses. Its high regard for cooperation and fellowship is recognized, and the basic principle is adopted by individualism. Its noble attempt to stop man from focusing on material things by negating private property is also acknowledged, but deemed too extreme and a disregard of man's inherent desire to own. Individualism taxes excess property to achieve much the same goal while allowing as much property as one can afford. It must be said that, ideally, communism is a quiet, peaceful, and pious system meant more for ascetics as opposed to an entire globe, unless, of course, that globe becomes a globe of ascetics.